Now, remote connections is a really interesting thing in the dropdown, and it's something that I'm not going to dig into. I just spent an hour reading up on remote connections, and basically what it allows you to do is connect Photoshop with things on your iPad and with other places. So if you have something like a color palette, or if you want to have some keyboard shortcuts done through your iPad rather than through your keyboard, or a few other things, you can do that with remote connections. And that's really, really cool, but also kind of in its infancy. And I haven't seen too many people who are actually using it, who are using it on a regular basis. And I would suggest for now kind of avoiding it. One thing that I will say, there's a program that allows you to load in a lot of keyboard shortcuts onto your iPad and then just click the buttons for what they represent. And you connect to it through remote connections, which you'll see actually just opens this up inside of your plugins options thing, inside of your preferences pane. Don't do that. Do the keyboard shortcuts from your keyboard, not from the iPad, because you'll have the tactile feedback then. And while it might be quicker in the short term on your iPad, I strongly, strongly suggest doing it in a way where you have the tactile feedback so you get that muscle memory. Otherwise, you're going to be much, much slower down the line. The other reason I say that is having keyboard shortcuts on the iPad is kind of a hack, kind of a patch that's going to happen between now and when all screens are like touchable. Like there's a lot of laptops right now that there's buttons on the screen. Photoshop is going to get there, but it'll be 2018, 2019 before Mac not only has screens you can press that are laptop accessible. I'm getting too in my head about future prediction things. My thing to say is don't use the keyboard shortcuts on an iPad or you will end up being slower in the long run. And in 2 or 3 years, I don't expect it to be the way that anyone does things. That's all I'm going to say on that. All right, color settings and assign profile and convert to profile. Let me get rid of these shapes. These shapes are pretty ugly. So there's a lot of things that can be said about color settings. If you're sending it to a professional printer, there's so much here. Like it's really the amount of options here is daunting, and getting into registering color right for a printer is its own class. I mean, there's something that I could say briefly here. If you know that you're sending it to a Fujifilm Eterna Vivid, printing density. If you know that you're sending it with this, great, match it. Ask your printer what color profile works best for them. And then if you go into edit color settings, this is where you can get that color profile exactly where you want it. You can also do something, assign profile. And what this does is rather than letting the device that it's being sent to guess at the color profile, this is giving it a little bit more information. So it's a good thing to do if you're really, really particular with the color. I'm going to ignore it for right now because for most people's purposes, that's not going to end up being too big of a deal. If you are doing things with sending things to the printer, it becomes a massive deal, and that's beyond the scope of this class. Let me keep going. Convert to profile, assign profile, all good things. Keyboard shortcuts. I already talked about keyboard shortcuts in detail. I'm not going to get into it more right here. Menus, same sort of thing. You can turn things on and off inside of menus. Start dictation. Basically, all this is saying right here is if you're typing something, you can say start dictation. I am typing something, and it's hearing me, and this is super cool. Just going to resize that. Let's see how good of a job it did. And you'll notice that I didn't actually go to the drop down. I just hit the FN button 2 times because that's the keyboard shortcut for it. And it does a pretty good job. So that is a comprehensive look at the edit profile, the edit drop down. I didn't get into a lot of color profiling because there's so much more to go into right there. And I showed you just the tip of the iceberg for how to play with brushes. And I didn't cover keyboard or menus because I've talked about that elsewhere. But other than that, that is the edit drop down. Let's go on to the next one, image.